My dad was a kind man. He was very concerned about his children. Um, he worked in those days. You worked 60 hours a week. You worked you worked 6 10-hour days. That included Saturday. Sunday was the only day he had off. But he would always make arrangements to take care of whatever needed to be done with his children. If we had a special occasion, he would be there for me, and then he'd go back to the store. I remember, though, that his family came from, um, his dad was James William Nixon, and then my dad was born in 1904. My mother was born in 1906. Dad was born in Huntington, and mother was born in Moroni. And my father was fortunate enough to go on a mission. He graduated from the University of Utah, as did my mother. So they were educated people, which was quite uncommon in those days. Not many people had that kind of an education. But it had been very difficult for people to find a job, and that's why he had to go clear to Colorado to find a job. My grandpa, on the Nixon side, had been a school teacher in Huntington. He'd also become quite an entrepreneur as uh, his wife, who was Effie Dean Woolley Nixon, um, came from a, a family of merchants. The Woolies were um, merchants, and uh, they did all kinds of things. They became one of them was a banker, and her dad was killed by the Indians. A lot of things happened in our family in those days that we don't even think of today. But Effie Dean Woolley wanted to start a store while my grandpa was teaching school in Huntington. And so that store became quite prominent. They handled everything from groceries to funeral attire and even caskets and so on and so forth. They later got a picture show there where they had a movie, the only movie in town, and but they were workers. They farmed. They had a store. My grandpa Nixon, James William Nixon, uh, was a school teacher there, and my grandmother ran the store, and she made dresses. She had an ability to cut out patterns and so on and so forth. That's on my dad's side. My mother's side, my grandpa was Daniel Olson. His folks came from Sweden for the church to America, and then my grandmother was Dorothea Nielsen, and she was from Denmark. And he was a sheep man and a turkey man. He was one of the first to start Moroni Feed, which is still existing today as a central turkey business of Utah. Anyway, my grandpa Olson wasn't very active in church. He used to be very um, philanthropic by helping with money on. He paid for a large mural in their chapel. He paid for the organ and things like that. But he didn't like to go sit by his neighbors when he knew they were going to get up and bear their testimonies about the gospel, and then they stole his water the next Monday morning. And so he didn't go to church, but Grandma did. On the Nixon side, they were active all of their lives, had different opportunities to serve as bishops and high councilmen and things of that nature. I was named after my father, and his name was Ezra John Nixon, and my mother's name was LaRue Ole Nixon, who the O stood for Olson. She was born in Moroni, and my father was born in Huntington. In 1904, my father was born, my mother was born in 1906. Yeah, my dad really, he worked long hours, worked hard. Uh, I remember the sandstorms coming through there. The wind would blow and the sand would blow so much that you couldn't even see the house across the street from you. And he used to take the white um, sheets and cover all the merchandise in the penny store so that it wouldn't get sand in the overalls and in the dresses and things that they sold there. And I remember how the troop trains would stop there. This is during the Second World War. The tramps would get off of the troop trains when the train stopped to take on coal and water. Then the tramps would come and knock on the doors of all of the little people, the residents, and beg for food. My mom would always fix them a sandwich. They'd say, "While I'm fixing the sandwich, I want you to hold those radishes, or I want you to work in the garden," or she'd make them always work for something before she'd give it to them. Some of them wouldn't. They'd just go to the next house. Those were tough days, but Dad would always find an opportunity to leave work. I have a picture of him where I'm doing a merit badge for my Cub Scouts. My mother was the den mother, and here's my dad sitting with a suit jacket and a tie that he had sitting on an old log there while I fix a meal to pass my cooking merit badge for my Cub Scouts. And Dad and Mom loved their kids. They took care of them. They expected us to work, though. We didn't have any privileges because we had a job. Everybody had to work, and so I was lucky. I really found something good because I made a lot of money. I made almost as much money as my dad did sometimes with selling those melons. Of course, that was just during a couple of months of melon season. But
I've just got down here that you said she devoted her whole life to her children.
She did. She was my den mother, and she had about 8 kids in her den. And as I go back through some scrapbooks and things that she prepared and pictures she took, I don't know when she had time to do everything she just did for me. And then I had a little sister, and later on another little sister, but she did the same, I'm sure, for my 2 sisters as time went on. But she wanted me to play the piano. I didn't want to play the piano. I never did learn to play the piano. I know that was one of the heartbreaks that my mother had because she dreamed about me being able to play hymns when I went on a mission. And by the way, when we lived in Ordway and in Del Norte, we were the only Mormons out there. There were no other LDS people in our town. But I went to church usually with my friends, and I would go to the Methodist church, or I'd go to the evangelical church with another friend, or Baptist church. I got my first Bible from a pastor in the Methodist church, and that's because I memorized a scripture and I was able to quote it to him the next Sunday when I came back there, and so I got a Bible from the Methodist Church. My dad taught in the Christian church for quite a while, and he built the congregation up that would come to his Sunday school classes because he used to tell lots of Book of Mormon stories, and until they finally found out that he was a Mormon, and they decided that a Mormon shouldn't be teaching in the Christian church. And it made the pastor really unhappy because he'd build up the congregation to where the contributions were increasing significantly when they come to listen to his Sunday school stories. And, but finally they fired him, and I guess then we organized a little branch of the church over in Lahana, which was 25 miles away. So there was the J.C. Penney manager in Rocky Ford and Lahana were both Mormon people, and they were about the only Mormons in their town. But we formed a little branch between those towns. Rocky Ford was 12 miles away. Lahana was 25 miles.